OCD in women is often misunderstood. It's commonly associated with excessive cleanliness or organizing behaviors. But in many trauma survivors, obsessive-compulsive patterns serve a much deeper function. They become internal systems of protection, not from germs or mess, but from emotional instability, abandonment, shame, or rejection. These patterns are often formed in childhood and solidified in adolescence or early adulthood. In women who have experienced trauma, particularly emotional neglect, inconsistent caregiving, or prolonged anxiety in close relationships, OCD becomes a way to regain control when their external world felt too unpredictable to trust. Dr. Jeffrey Schwartz, a leading researcher in neuroplasticity and OCD treatment, reframes OCD not as a fixed disease, but as a brain-based habit loop that can be rewired through conscious attention and redirection. His four-step method emphasizes the brain's capacity for change, beginning with recognition, followed by behavioral rewiring. But to even begin this process, we must understand how these obsessive behaviors are functioning in women's lives. They are not random. They are structured, emotionally loaded, and neurologically reinforced. The first pattern is mental checking. This refers to the compulsive internal review of thoughts, actions, or past events to ensure that something bad didn't happen. It may sound like, did I say something wrong? What if they misunderstood me? Or was I careless and didn't notice? These questions repeat endlessly in the mind, never leading to certainty or closure. This isn't just overthinking. It's a form of internalized hypervigilance. The brain is stuck in a cycle of threat detection even when no real danger exists. Dr. Schwartz observed that in OCD, the brain's caudate nucleus, responsible for shifting between thoughts, doesn't function properly. This means the brain can't disengage from the perceived threat, even when logic says there's nothing wrong. But in trauma survivors, the cause is often deeper. They didn't learn to feel safe. They learned that safety only existed when everything was controlled, reviewed, or morally correct. As children, they may have been punished for small mistakes, ignored when emotionally distressed, or praised only when they were quiet, helpful, or perfect. So they internalized a rule: I must be careful or I'll be hurt. Mental checking becomes a way to manage this fear. It provides short-term relief, but reinforces long-term instability. The woman who checks is not unsure because she's irrational. She's unsure because her nervous system never learned to feel stable without external validation. And the more she checks, the more her brain believes that checking is the only way to stay safe. Dr. Schwartz's first step, relabel, begins here, identifying the thought as an obsessive pattern, not a real signal. It sounds simple, but it breaks the loop. By saying, this is an OCD thought, the woman interrupts the belief that the thought needs to be answered. And that interruption, repeated over time, creates the space for something new to emerge, a different way of responding, not driven by fear, but by choice.
The second pattern that often emerges in women with trauma-related OCD is reassurance-seeking. This behavior may appear externally mild, asking someone to confirm they're not upset, or double-checking a decision with a friend, but in reality, it reflects a deep dependence on others for emotional stability. The woman who seeks reassurance is not simply looking for answers. She's trying to feel safe in relationships where safety once felt conditional. Reassurance-seeking can take many forms, repeatedly asking if one has offended someone, needing validation after making small choices, or looking to others to confirm moral or emotional correctness. Often, even after being reassured, the doubt quickly returns. This isn't due to a lack of intelligence or insight. It's because the brain's threat response system has learned to distrust internal signals. And when someone has experienced emotional inconsistency, their brain wires itself to expect abandonment or punishment unless they receive frequent confirmation that everything is okay. Dr. Schwartz described how these patterns stem from the same faulty brain loop, an overactive error detection system that falsely signals danger. The compulsive urge to make sure becomes neurologically rewarding, a quick way to reduce anxiety, but ultimately reinforces the brain's need to perform the behavior again. Each time the woman seeks reassurance and receives it, her brain releases relief chemicals, confirming the belief that reassurance equals safety. But the relief doesn't last and the behavior becomes addictive. From a trauma lens, this loop is even more understandable. Many women who developed this pattern were taught, directly or indirectly, that their emotions or perceptions couldn't be trusted. They were told they were too sensitive or they were ignored when upset. Over time, they learned that it's safer to ask someone else what's real rather than rely on their own instincts. But this creates dependency, not resilience. The more reassurance they seek, the less capable they feel of managing their emotions independently. In the 4-step method, the response begins again with awareness. Relabel the urge, this is reassurance-seeking, not a necessary action. Reattribute the thought, this feeling is coming from a loop in my brain, not from reality. And then, instead of asking for reassurance, refocus on a different behavior, something calming, neutral, or value-based. This might be stepping outside, journaling without analysis, or doing a task that requires attention but doesn't fuel anxiety. Repeating this process teaches the brain that safety does not require constant confirmation from others. And more importantly, it slowly builds a sense of internal trust, the kind that trauma once stripped away.
The third pattern, perfectionism as control, often manifests in more visible ways. It looks like constant organization, rigid routines, obsessive planning, or excessive productivity. But the motivation behind it isn't ambition or excellence, it's fear. Fear of being caught off guard, fear of emotional chaos, fear that if one thing goes wrong, everything might collapse. For trauma survivors, control becomes a substitute for safety. In environments where emotions were unpredictable or boundaries were inconsistent, the brain begins to associate calm with structure. The woman may have learned that being perfect, academically, socially, emotionally, was the only way to avoid conflict or disappointment. Over time, she doesn't just strive for perfection, she depends on it. Her identity becomes tied to being competent, prepared, and in control. Any deviation from that image creates internal distress. Dr. Schwartz's work explains how this behavior becomes compulsive. The brain receives a signal, something is off. The compulsion, whether it's tidying, rewriting, or over-preparing, gives a temporary sense of order. But like all OCD patterns, it doesn't solve the issue. It simply reinforces the need to act again. The more the woman relies on control to feel okay, the more the brain learns that discomfort is intolerable without a ritual to manage it. And socially, perfectionism is often rewarded. These women are praised for being reliable, high-achieving, or detail-oriented. But what goes unnoticed is the psychological toll, chronic anxiety, burnout, insomnia, and a deep fear of failure. The woman doesn't feel good about her performance, she just feels less anxious temporarily. And if she doesn't meet her own standards, the inner critic is brutal. The solution, again, begins with relabeling the compulsion. This urge to perfect is a response to anxiety, not a genuine need. Reattributing the discomfort. My brain thinks something bad will happen if this isn't right, but that's a pattern, not a truth. Then refocusing on something different, something imperfect but aligned with her values. Leaving the house even if everything isn't in place. Turning in work that's good enough rather than flawless. Saying no even if it disappoints someone. Over time, these acts send a new message to the brain that emotional safety doesn't require complete control, that uncertainty can be survived, that she is still valuable even when imperfect. And slowly, the grip of perfectionism begins to loosen, not by force, but by choice.
As these patterns begin to shift,
What emerges is not just symptom relief, but a reclamation of self. The woman who once felt controlled by her thoughts and compulsions starts to notice that she has a say, that she can pause, evaluate, and decide whether to obey the urge. This is what Dr. Jeffrey Schwartz emphasized above all, that the brain can change, but only when it's met with repeated, conscious redirection. The four-step method isn't about silencing thoughts. It's about not reacting to them automatically. The woman learns that thoughts can exist without being acted upon, that anxiety can rise and fall like a wave, and that her job isn't to stop the wave, but to stay grounded while it passes. Each time she relabels a thought, reattributes its source, refocuses her attention, and revalues what matters, she lays down a new neurological path. And the more she walks that path, the stronger it becomes. This is how true healing begins, not with perfect calm or complete silence, but with the decision to stop obeying fear, to stop organizing life around anxiety, to stop chasing certainty, approval, or flawlessness, and start choosing presence, flexibility, and self-trust. What makes this process challenging is that it often requires doing the opposite of what feels safe. Not checking, not asking again, not correcting the small detail. It requires discomfort, but a productive kind, the kind that builds emotional strength instead of temporary relief. And through that discomfort, something shifts. The brain learns to tolerate ambiguity. The nervous system begins to relax, and the woman discovers she is more than the thoughts she's had, more than the rituals she's performed, and more than the pain she's carried. Because in the end, the thoughts may still come, but now she knows she doesn't have to follow. The woman who knows her worth doesn't chase, she chooses.